Cigarettes were the first thing that I was introduced to.
Alcohol and cigarettes,
Drinking, smoked pot,
Mushrooms,
ecstasy,
anything I could get my hands on to swallow.
prescription drugs,
liquid acid,
Heroin,
cocaine,
Percocet, Percodan.
Vicodin, Valium.
and then God knows whatever the marijuana was laced with.
Your brain at 20, I would think this is a 70-year-old's brain.
Teenagers, adults, they have no clue that when they're smoking pot, they're actually damaging their brain.
Everything that I saw in school about it, I found out one day that it's all true and it's all happening to me.
When your brain works right, you work right.
I'd like to just be able to think normally.
What we're looking at here is a healthy brain.
I'm just worried that my brain cells are going to be gone and they're never coming back.
And this is a cocaine brain. So the real question is, which brain do you want?
Dr. Daniel Amen is a psychiatrist, brain imaging expert, best-selling author, and medical director of the Amen Clinics. He has pioneered the use of brain imaging in clinical psychiatric practice and is a noted expert in the field of the brain and behavior. Dr. Amen's breakthrough research and insights provide hope and more effective treatment for millions of people today.
I spent the last 14 years of my life looking at the brain. We've done 21,000 scans. And one of the first things that I learned is that toxic things like alcohol, drugs, nicotine, much caffeine actually lower overall functioning in your brain. Most people never, ever learn that their brain matters, that the actual moment-by-moment functioning of the brain matters. So what we're going to do today is actually talk about the brain with a number of kids who've done drugs, kids who haven't done drugs. And what you'll see today is that when we image the brain, we can actually demonstrate damage to the brain. I mean, so it's really clear why you shouldn't use drugs, is because they damage your brain, and we can prove it by looking.
My first experiences with any type of drugs or alcohol were cigarettes. Cigarettes were the first thing that I was introduced to. I was actually in 5th grade, so I started out pretty young.
I have never used drugs before, ever. The only time I ever had anything to drink was when I went to Italy, and everybody was just kind of almost wasted the entire time. But that was about it.
I used drugs since I was about 14. First time I wanted to use drugs, I went out on my own. I wasn't pressured by anybody. Went asking around at school. School seemed to be a great place to get drugs.
I've never tried using drugs, mostly because I just never had a desire to. It didn't seem like a smart thing to do. It didn't seem like a cost-effective thing to do. My parents would kill me. And anyone that I know who had used drugs did not have good experiences and didn't make good choices because of it.
I turned into a real bad alcoholic because at the time I didn't realize until later, like maybe 4 or 5 months, I was just drinking, you know, like go to a friend's house, I would take, 3 or 4 drinks before I went there. I would have to take drinks before I went anywhere. I would take drinks at night, drink all day long, and that kind of got ugly after a while, because I would wake up and I would drink to get rid of the hangover, so it was constantly drunk. And then eventually when I was driving to school, I was shaking. I had the drunk shakes, and it was like, I wonder why I'm shaking. I didn't realize at the time that you get shakes from the drunk, from drinking so much.
I've used various prescription drugs, antidepressants, Vicodin, Valium.
Smoked pot, drank alcohol, heroin.
I wanted to keep it from my mother because I didn't want to have to go and tell my mom, I'm a heroin addict.
Cocaine, crystal meth.
All sorts of pills, Valium, Klonopin, Xanax, Vicodin, Percocet, Percodan, the whole slew of pills.
Ecstasy,
liquid acid.
And then God knows whatever the marijuana was laced with.
It was quite a bit of things.
Your brain's involved in everything you do. How you think, how you feel, how you act, how well you get along with other people. Has to do with the moment-by-moment functioning of your brain. So if you just think about how you do in school, has to do with how your brain works. How you do in your relationships with your parents, with your friends, with your love, has to do with how your brain works. How you do in sports. How good you are at volleyball, how good you are at tennis, how good you are at football. That's all controlled by your brain.
At the beginning of my high school career, I moved, did a big move just to another country, and I was not happy about that at all. And there were just some really hard days in that time when I really struggled to find a way to cope with that. I never really considered drugs as an option. Didn't know of any way that I had access to them, but also never tried to come up with one, never looked for a way to use them. But it was a struggle to find ways to deal with that and to find an outlet for that frustration and depression.
It was a great escape from everything. I mean, high school's hard. High school's hard, middle school's hard, growing up's hard. You know, I never really had triggers like most of my friends. Most of my friends would go, hey, dude, I gotta get drunk this weekend, man. My parents have been yelling at me all weekend, or all week, and my girlfriend broke up with me or anything like that. And for me, it was just more out of habit than anything. Always gonna do it, always did it, always did it.
At that time, life was just kind of boring.
Everyone has something in their life that they don't like. And I feel that whatever drug that they're using is a way for them to forget about that.
You want to rebel, you want to be cool, you feel depressed, you don't want to self-medicate. There's a slew of reasons, many different reasons.
When your brain works right, you work right. And when your brain has trouble, you have trouble in your life. If we looked at a healthy brain, what we'd see is this nice, beautiful, full activity brain. If we looked at a brain of someone who had a brain injury, or a brain of someone who used heroin, we'd see overall decreased activity in your brain. So when your brain works right, you work right. When your brain is troubled, you have trouble in your life.
And you've all known people who've had trouble, right? Trouble in school, trouble at work, trouble in relationships. And nobody ever thinks about your brain, but it controls absolutely everything. And that's why one of my goals is to teach people to love their brains. Sounds stupid, right? But if you don't love your brain and you don't take care of it, you're going to have a lot more trouble in life.
My son Seth is 17 and he's a junior in high school. He's active in the football program.
My mom is understanding, she's intelligent, she's relatively easy to be around.
He's charming, he's good looking.
She gives me a lot of freedom and she trusts me for the most part.
And he's wonderful.
Sometimes she gets a little overprotective.
And sometimes he has really bad judgment.
That's just her being a mom though, because that's how most parents are.
For example, a number of months ago, I was headed out on a business trip.
She was going to Puerto Rico and I'm like, okay, she's gonna be out of town for a long weekend.
So a lot of things had to be set up before I left. And I sat down with Seth and talked to him about no parties, no alcohol.
She basically went through a list of things, kind of the stuff that you hear every day during like health class or whatever, DARE and all that stuff. Just, this is what can happen if you have a party. People could drive home drunk and this and this and this. And if something bad happens, that she could get in trouble.
And of course, Seth at 17 said, "Don't worry, Mom, don't worry, nothing will happen."
And that's right around the time of my friend's birthday. And he's like, you know what, this is what you could do for your gift to me. You could throw me a little shindig at your house.
And he told me, "Don't worry, Mom, I know what can happen. I wouldn't throw a party."
I was like, okay, I'll just have a small little one. It shouldn't be that big of an issue, and if it's small, she won't find out about it.
Don't worry, don't worry, don't worry.
We were just gonna drink a little and have a little fun at my house while my mom was out of town. I didn't think it was a big deal. And he goes to another school in my district, doesn't go to my school, but basically most of their school found out about it. So a ton of people were showing up at my house that I didn't even know.
Did you know your brain's the most complicated organ in the universe? There is nothing as complicated as the human brain, nothing.
Your brain, estimated to be about 3 pounds, has 100 billion nerve cells, or neurons, in the brain. And each neuron is connected to other neurons by up to 40,000 individual connections. You actually have more connections in your brain than there are stars in the universe. And even though your brain is only 2% of your body's weight, it uses 20 to 30% of the calories you consume. So of the breakfast you had this morning, or the lunch, or the dinner you're gonna have tonight, third of it, almost a third of it, goes to feed just 2% of your body's weight.
I have a question. If your brain is the most complicated organ in the entire universe, then how can you even hope to understand any of it, you know? I mean, if there's so much to it, how do we know what works?
Well, that's a very good question. And that's one of the reasons that imaging is helpful. And over the weekend, we're going to scan you guys, and we're going to actually look. And what we do is we do a study called brain SPECT imaging. And SPECT looks at blood flow and activity patterns in the brain. So actually look individually at the pattern of activity and the pattern of blood flow in the brain. Now there's a lot to learn, but what we know, for example, is that certain parts of your brain do certain things. The front part of the brain, called the prefrontal cortex, it's the executive part of the brain. I call it the Jiminy Cricket part of the brain. If you remember Jiminy Cricket in the movie Pinocchio, Jiminy Cricket was Pinocchio's conscience. It helped him decide between right and wrong, helped him keep on the right path for his goals. So the front part of your brain is called the prefrontal cortex, largest in humans and in any other animal by far. In fact, it's 30% of the human brain, 11% of the chimpanzee brain, 7% of your dog's brain. And I hate to tell you this because I have cats and I love my cat Annabelle. 3.5% of the cat's brain. They're not that smart. And what the prefrontal cortex is involved in is forethought and judgment, impulse control, organization, planning, concentration, thinking about tomorrow and planning your life effectively so that you can make that happen. See, my cat has no forethought, right? I mean, I have pictures of her drinking out of the toilet, even though I've told her, stop it! Right? Right? But this is a very powerful part of the brain. And this part of the brain really doesn't develop fully until you're about 25. So doing early drug or alcohol use actually damages development. People, teenagers, adults, they have no clue that when they're smoking pot, they're actually damaging their brain. They have no clue about that because they've never been taught how important your brain is.
Marijuana shuts down a lot of your brain when you use it. You know, it slows your reactions. You know, it's basically just slowing down everything about you.
In all honesty, I have yet to see one truly redeeming quality from any drug. I mean, there's nothing that I've taken that said, wow, you know what, the whole world would be a better place if everybody just smoked pot, or if everybody did acid or took shrooms or whatever. I mean, it was all to distort reality. And I mean, a lot of good the world would be if everybody had a twisted sense of reality.
I was like seeing things all over the place. Not only seeing things, but I thought I was like in a different place. I thought I was like back 5 years old, like at my dad's house for a second. And then I'd say, oh no, I'm here. And then it's like stuff on the walls. It's like, and it was just like this crazy thing. And that got me into wanting to do more and more.
It was a pretty good experience the first time, so I wanted to use a little more. And from then, you know, I went back to the same person, bought more. And just from then on, I just continued using, and then after a while, it just grew to be more and more each day.
There's another part of the brain, it's called the temporal lobes. It's underneath your temples and behind your eyes. It's very important because it's involved with language. So reading, listening, remembering words, being able to name objects, temporal lobe. Also involved with memory. And we know people have Alzheimer's disease. Probably know somebody who's had memory problems as they age. This part of the brain deteriorates. So memory, mood stability, temper control. And we talked about reading. It's also involved in reading social cues. Being able to look at somebody and go, you're interested in what I'm saying, or you're not interested in what I'm saying, right? So being able to read facial expressions is in this part of the brain. So one might think, well, that's really important if you want to get a date. Or it's really important if you want to have a conversation with somebody or make a friend. But you know, the important point is that certain parts of your brain do certain things. When we talked about the back part of your brain, it's heavily involved with direction sense.
I was stumbling around. I couldn't tell which direction was which. And I was walking from my friend's house back to my house, and normally it would be a 20-minute walk, and it took me 2.5 hours.
The back half of the brain sort of receives the world or brings it in. So sight and hearing and taste and touch. The front half of the brain thinks about it and then decides what to do about it and then does it. So one is sort of a receptive function. The other one is a do something about it function. That's why the front part of your brain is so important. And then the green part, it's really not green in real life, but the green part is called the cerebellum. It's involved with coordination, but also thought coordination, being able to think quickly and learn easily. And so one of the things we find is coordination exercises, like dancing or doing certain sports, really help people think better. So playing music is a coordination exercise. It can be very helpful cognitively. But if you think about it, your brain is soft, housed in a hard skull. It does many important things. We should really be protecting it. When you're in the car, you should really wear your seatbelt, right? Because if your head goes through the windshield, even if you live, and many people live after that, they're not the same. They're not their best.
I don't know really what happened. The neurons kind of just stopped, and I kind of said, whoa, I can really feel my acid now, and I just fell back. And then all I remember is, like, time just went away. Like 5 minutes later, I woke up, they were slapping me in the face, Karthi, 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 boom, boom, boom. And I woke up, and I had somebody's finger in my mouth trying to keep him in my tongue. And I guess I had overdosed. I don't know if it was an overdose or sensory overdose or what, but that wasn't fun at all.
Is it still possible to recover from brain injuries in general? I know you've spoken about physical injuries, but I mean, some of the injuries that we bring about on ourselves with drugs and things like that, once you damage your brain that way, is it stuck like that?
Well, the very exciting news, and we have just learned this in the last 10 years, is that your brain can change. Now, obviously, if you do the wrong things for your brain, if you're smoking pot, if you're using drugs, if you use too much caffeine, too much nicotine, it's going to damage brain function. But the brain is very alive. And if you then stop those things and do healthier things, you can actually see the brain change. I wrote this cool book a couple of years ago called Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. And the reason it has that title is we have done hundreds of before and after scans looking at people who had troubled brains and then teaching them a brain-healthy life and then looking at them again. And what we find when we do the right things, we can balance your brain. So there's a lot that we can recover, especially if you're young. So whatever we see on your scans is good news because you have what you have, right? It's good to know about what you have. But then the next thing is, what do you do about it? And hopefully, you'll do the smart thing, which is love your brain, respect your brain, honor your brain, so that it will work better and you can be your best self.
The party on Friday, the one that was supposed to be my friend's birthday party, was a blast. It was one of the best parties I've ever been to. And people who saw me after that party told me it was one of the best parties they had ever been to.
So he felt very popular over the whole thing. And people that he didn't even know were surrounding him and talking to him.
The next day I cleaned it all up, and that wasn't that big of an issue. The big issue was Saturday night, because earlier in the week, I'd said something to one of my football buddies about, oh yeah, my mom's gonna be out of town this weekend. It's like, you should throw a party. I thought, oh, well, why not? Because probably not gonna get caught. So he's like, who do you want to come? I'm like, I don't know, invite some people, I don't really care. And when I told one of my friends, invite some people, turns out that most of my school found out about it. So there'd be random people walking up to me at lunch during that school week going, hey, you're Seth, right? Huge party at your house on Saturday. I was like, oh no.
This was Saturday midday. And I had talked to him a couple of times. And there was just something, there was a tone in his voice, or it wasn't what he said, not even particularly how he said it, but there was just something, a tone that maybe just a mother could know that something's different.
Saturday night came around, me and a bunch of my friends were hanging out at my house. There was probably 50 people there at that point.
At 9 o'clock at night, I called my friends who were supposed to be watching him, and I said, I think he's in over his head. I think something's going on. Would you please go over there? And they said, oh, sure.
I still don't understand it to this day because somehow she knew that I was having a party and she wasn't even on the same continent.
So they got up, a captain in the Navy and his retired Navy wife walked into my home with a minimum of 70 teenagers and more coming down the street at 9 o'clock at night.
I was sitting on the couch, I had a beer in my hand.